As I prayed about what I wanted to share with you, all I could think about was the moment where I woke up in a hospital room after a fatal suicide attempt and realized that I was still alive. But to be honest with you, the first emotion I felt was not gratitude, it was shame. And I remember lying there thinking, how did my life get here? Not just how did I end up in this hospital, but how did I become a woman who believed that this was her only way out? And the truth is, that hospital was not where the story began, because for years, I dealt with unspoken pain. And that moment, it finally caught up with me. In 2019, my marriage was ending, and it felt like my whole world was falling apart. But it wasn't just the end of the marriage that broke me. See, it was everything that I had never dealt with prior to that moment. I lost my mother when I was 16 years old, and she was my safe space. She was the person that I trusted the most. But when she died, everybody just assumed I was strong because I held it in. I smiled while silently suffering. But what I didn't realize is I was not healing. I was just learning how to survive, because there is a difference between surviving and actually healing. And then many years later, I lost my father, and the grief just continued. But this grief was different because my father struggled with alcoholism. And because of that, he was always emotionally unavailable to me for much of my life. So when he died, I wasn't just grieving the loss of my father. I was grieving the relationship I had always hoped for. But I never gave myself permission to grieve either of those losses. And I did what most people do. I just kept going. How many times have we done that? Just kept going because life does not stop. Bills have to be paid. Children have to be raised. And people still expect us to show up. So that's what I did. I built a successful career in human resources, got married, was a mother. And from the outside, it looked like my life was good because people saw a woman that was professional, saw somebody who had life figured out, and a woman who seemed like she had all the answers. But what they did not see was the woman going home every night, carrying grief, loneliness, shame, abandonment, and fear. I became so good at functioning, pretending like I was strong, really good at helping everybody else while I was falling apart. And see, we can spend so much time convincing other people that we're okay, that eventually we start convincing ourselves of that. And that's where I was, but I wasn't okay. I was emotionally exhausted, but I didn't know how to say it. I didn't know how to ask for help. And I definitely did not know how to sit with my emotions because nobody had ever taught me how. So I did what a lot of people do while they're hurting. I looked for something else to take the pain away. I shopped. I looked for validation outside of myself. I had affairs. And I wanted to just say that to say that that part of my story carried so much shame. I was so embarrassed, judged myself heavily for the mistakes that I made. And today I'm not saying that because I'm proud of those moments. I'm saying it because healing requires honesty. And all of those things were not about the shopping or the affairs. It was really about the emptiness that I didn't understand because I was emotionally starved. I had spent years trying to silence emotions that were screaming for my attention. But instead of listening, I kept running until one day I could not run anymore. And depression quietly took over my life. Eventually, I convinced myself and the people that I love, or rather, I convinced myself and thought that the people I love would be better without me. So that's what I did. I tried to end it all. Thank God I was wrong. I spent 8 days inside a behavioral health unit, and I was introduced to this wonderful program of Emotions Anonymous. Two members came I had never met before, and they introduced me to this program. I didn't know anything about 12 steps. I didn't know anything about Emotions Anonymous, but I knew that my life was unraveling and I needed help. And I'll never forget one of the members gifted me with the blue book and the safety that they gave me. No judgment, no shame, just compassion. And they told me about the meetings. But before they walked out that room, they gave me something I had never felt in a really long time: hope. And I don't think I realized it that day, but they were not just inviting me into a meeting. They were inviting me back to life. Because when I left that hospital, I knew I could not go back to life as usual. So eventually I started attending an outpatient program, still trying to make sense of everything that happened. And I was introduced again to Emotions Anonymous. But I still hadn't walked into a meeting yet. They gave me the opportunity to learn more about this program. So I made a commitment with some other members inside the outpatient program that following Saturday, I would go to a meeting. But I didn't know it was going to change my life the way that it did. I just knew I needed help and was trying to survive. And I'll never forget that moment. May 4th, 2019, I walked into my very first Emotion Anonymous meeting, carrying more than grief. I was carrying guilt, shame, and I was carrying the belief that somehow I had failed everybody. And I remember introducing myself. And when I started sharing my story, I was crying profusely. Not the type of crying where it's just a few tears that you just wipe away. I'm talking about the kind of crying that comes from years of holding everything in. But I remember looking around the room thinking, they're probably wondering what's wrong with me. But instead, they just listened. They didn't make any weird faces, no side talk. They just looked at me as a woman who was powerless to her emotions. And they simply gave me something I had not given myself in a while: grace, hope. And they kept telling me to come back. Because when I walked in that room, I felt broken. But I walked out realizing I was not alone. And that meeting became a place where I didn't have to pretend. I could finally remove my mask. I didn't have to be an HR professional. I didn't have to have all the answers. I could simply come just as I am and speak my truth. And for the first time, my truth didn't shame me anymore. It finally gave me somewhere to begin. Now, I wish I could tell you that after that first meeting, immediately everything just started working, but it didn't. And when I went home that day, I thought, all I got to do is just read the blue book and I will figure this out by myself. Because see, that's the pattern, right? I think I can do this alone. I don't need anybody. But it's nice to have people. Because for so long I was taught, you don't ask for help. You don't depend on anybody for anything. But then someone told me something. You need a sponsor to work this program. You can't do this alone. But I remember thinking, okay, but how do I find a sponsor? Who will want to do this work with me? And eventually God placed the right sponsor into my life. And when I recall that moment, I realized that was not an accident. That was an answered prayer. Because my sponsor walked me through every one of the 12 steps during the pandemic, during a very difficult time for a lot of people. She didn't let me hide behind my excuses. See, she loved me enough to tell me the truth. So while the rest of the world was talking about lockdown, God was slowing me down. And for the very first time in my life, I could not stay busy enough to outrun myself. There was no distractions, no hiding behind my work, no pretending that I was okay. It was just me my sponsor, my higher power, and the work. And as I began working my inventory, I discovered something completely that changed my life. See, I thought my biggest problem was my marriage ending, but it wasn't. See, the marriage ending only exposed the wounds that had already been there for years. The abandonment I felt after losing my mother, the grief I never processed, the pain of losing my father, the anger I had towards him, and all the unhealthy ways I kept searching for love, validation, and relief. So I had to stop asking, why did this happen to me? And I started asking, God, what are you trying to show me? And that question changed everything. Because recovery is not just about changing behavior. See, it was about allowing God to transform my heart, transform me inside out. And as many of you know, working the steps is not always comfortable because you have to see yourself. And there were days where I wanted to quit because it's not easy to tell your story. My sponsor often reminded me, Keana, recovery is not about blaming yourself, nor is it about blaming everyone else. It's about the willingness to see the truth. So as I worked the fourth step, I started seeing patterns I had never noticed before. And I started understanding that for years, I had spent most of my life reacting instead of responding. So every time I felt rejected, abandoned, or unworthy, I reached for somebody else to make the pain go away. Sometimes trying to fix everybody else so I didn't have to sit with myself. How many of us can relate to that story? See, it's so amazing how creative we become when we are trying to avoid our emotions. But here's what I learned in this program is you can't distract yourself from your emotions. And you can only suppress and numb and deny yourself for so long. But eventually your emotions ask for your attention because mine certainly did. Because for so long, I thought emotions were the problem. I just wanted the sadness to go away. I wanted my fear to just disappear. And I wanted the loneliness to stop hurting. I wanted to feel anything other than what I was feeling. But during this journey, God began showing me something different about my emotions. Because see, our emotions don't try to destroy us. Our emotions are information. Our emotions are trying to reveal something to us. And my emotions were pointing towards the places in my life that still needed healing. The fear pointed me towards my own insecurities. The anger pointed me towards the unresolved grief. And the loneliness pointed me toward the relationships I needed to build the most, the relationship with myself and the relationship with God. Even my shame became a teacher. See, shame kept telling me I wasn't enough, but God kept reminding me that I had always been enough. And that's the beauty of recovery. Because sometimes recovery is not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming who God always created you to be before the fear, the grief, the trauma, and life convinced you otherwise. One of the most powerful parts of this journey was making amends. And I don't just mean saying I'm sorry. I mean taking accountability, looking at my side of the street, owning the ways my pain had affected the other people around me. And that's not easy, but it was so freeing. It was one of the greatest gifts God gave me through this program, was being able to heal most of my relationships, especially the relationship with my ex-husband. And if someone had told me while I was lying in that hospital bed that one day we would forgive each other and become friends and successfully co-parent our son together, I never would have believed it. But that's exactly what happened. And it wasn't because we're perfect, but because healing changed the way I showed up. And another deeply personal part of making amends and the forgiveness work came with even forgiving my father. And some of you might be wondering, how do you make amends with someone who is no longer here? Because I asked myself the same question. Because my father had already transitioned, so there was no conversation that we could have, no hugs, no opportunity to sit across the table from each other. But through prayer, writing, meditation, and surrender, God allowed me to release the years of anger, disappointment, and resentment. So I stopped waiting for the relationship I wish we could have experienced. And I began making peace with the father that I did have. Now, that doesn't erase the pain, but it does bring peace to me. And sometimes peace is the greatest amends that we could ever receive. So by the time I had completed all 12 steps, something inside of me had changed. And it was not overnight. And it definitely wasn't all at once. But little by little, one day at a time, the woman who walked into Emotions Anonymous believing her life was over, started believing her life had purpose. It had value. And I finally understood what 12-step meant when it talked about having the spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening is not just about seeing God differently. It's about seeing yourself differently. It's realizing that even the darkest chapters of our life can become part of something bigger than us, help someone else get through their struggles. I had no idea then that God was already preparing me for the work that I am doing today. And I wish I could tell you that because I completed all the 12 steps that I never struggled again, but that wouldn't be true because I'm still human. And I still began to be powerless to my emotion. Every now and then, the loneliness and the grief will show up, except this time I have a program. I respond differently. So I don't continue to run from myself. I always go back to the steps. I do my moral inventory. I call my sponsor when I need support. I continue to pray. I continue to journal. And I continue to hold myself accountable and get honest with myself. This experience reminded me that healing is not always linear. And recovery is not something that we can just complete and put it on the shelf. It's something that we practice, we embody it daily. EA did not teach me how to stop feeling. It taught me how to understand what I was feeling, recognize the patterns, and make different choices. Emotions Anonymous gave me the tools to heal, and that healing eventually revealed my purpose. Because today I get to speak, and I'm an emotional literacy consultant and an author of a book titled Healing Out Loud. People often ask me, how did I find this work? And the truth is, I didn't find it. God was preparing me for it. And it may have began in that hospital room, but it grew through Emotions Anonymous and the 12 steps and my sponsor. And most importantly, the relationship with my higher power. And every moment I chose honesty over hype. Because for years, I believed my emotions were the problem. But through this wonderful program, I learned that my emotions are information. They're not the enemy. I simply didn't have the language to understand them, like most people. And that is why I continue to share the message of Emotions Anonymous. Because there is no pill to heal. There is no pill for unspoken pain, grief, or trauma. And at some point, we have to become willing to feel it, face it, speak it, and allow ourselves to heal. And when I think about 12-step now, I understand it totally different. It tells us to carry this message and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And that's exactly what I'll continue to strive to do. And whether that's sharing that in the meetings like I do today, or speaking on stages like I do, or teaching this in workshops, I continue to carry forward that same hope that once carried me through. Because if I can survive it, you can too. So I will always be grateful for the EA members that walked into the hospital. They probably thought they were just simply inviting me to a meeting. They had no idea, though, that they were helping shape the rest of my life. And the woman who opened her eyes in that hospital couldn't imagine sitting where I'm sitting at today. But by the grace of God, the love of this fellowship, and the guidance of my sponsor and the principles of this program, here I am, alive and healthy. So if you are struggling today, keep going. Keep coming back to the program. Keep working the steps. Keep trusting in your sponsor and keep believing in your higher power. And most importantly, keep telling yourself the truth. Your life may not change all at once, but I promise you it will. Mine did. With one honest decision at a time, healing is possible. And I am living proof that pain can become purpose. Relationships can be restored, and the life you once wanted to end can become a life you are deeply grateful to live. So instead of asking, why me? Today I ask myself, why not me? Why not use my story to carry forth the hope that was once carried to me? So thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to share my story with you. And thank you for allowing my story to sit beside yours. And God bless you all, family. And for that, I will keep coming back.